All right, Jabosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our TALMUD sponsors for Adar Beis, the Schwarzbaum family, for dedicating all the Shuman Drushos this month in memory of Rabbi Aaron Schwarzbaum, Aharon Yosef ben Meir, Zichron Livracha, Leah Sol, in the zechus of her daughter Ilana bas Esther, successful surgery, and a complete refuah sheleima. Thank you so much. And for the return, Meir Hashem, of all of our hostages. Maia Hoffman, Ari, thank you. Maia Hoffman, in memory of her father, Reuven ben Emanuel, and in the merit of hatzlacha, health and joy for her entire family. Yoel Sara Kelman, in honor of the birth of their son, and in memory of Staff Sergeant David Sasson, Hashem Yikom Damo, age 21, who was killed fighting in Gaza on March 6th, 2024. We hope to know the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshama will have an aliyah, the families in neshama, our hostages will Meir Hashem come home b'shalom and b'karov, and our soldiers will Meir Hashem be successful in all of their endeavors. We'll say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, today's daf is daf Chaf. And we are picking up in Meir Hashem on Yud Tes Amud Beis 19b. We left off with Maskif Lo Rav Zvid, which is... Oh, actually, we got a little bit further than that. That's the truth. But let's just pick up there, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from before it gets wide. Don't get excited. I'm from the bottom of the page. From before it gets wide. So the Gemara says, so remember again, we're trying to reconcile. We're in that really riveting sugya. It really is riveting about if you lose a shtar, essentially you lose a document, under what circumstances can that document be returned versus when can't it be returned? When are we concerned that perhaps returning it to the wrong person could potentially go ahead and allow for exploitation of that document versus when are the effects of return relatively innocuous and therefore again could be returned? Kind of mix in there about what happens when the parties involved maybe admit that the document, there's a side discussion over here, kind of, or like a side consideration about, I'll give you a simple example. We're often focused in the event that I'm walking down the street, I find the loan document. So the Shaila is right, says, Reuven lent $1,000 to Shimon. So the question, of course, is, who do I give it back to? If I give it back to Reuven, the lender, then that could potentially allow Reuven to recollect the loan that's already been paid off. I give it back to Shimon. That could allow Shimon to essentially not pay back a debt that he should have had to pay. There's another second consideration, or I should say third consideration. And what's the third consideration? Maybe this document was drafted with the anticipation of lending money, but was never executed. Right? In which case, again, lo hayu dvarnom. So there's all this stuff swirling around. So we had, in yesterday's staff, we pretty much spent the majority of Amud Beis going ahead and focusing on the machlokes between the Brisa and the Mishnah. So now, Maskif Lo Rav Zvid. Avaha idi daitikos katani. But I will say again, we tried to set it up as one case of talking about the gift of a shchiv meira, the gift of a healthy person. But Rav Zvid said both of the Brisa and the Mishnah are talking about daitikos, which are both speaking about deathbed gifts that are committed to writing. To which the Gemara says, Ella Amrav Zvid hab b'shchimira. Hava b'shchimira. Both are dealing with cases of shchimira. V'lo kashya habe v'habe brei. This is actually where we left off. One case is talking about where the shchimira himself is claiming that, or is making the claim, and one is where the son of the shchimira, i.e., the shchimira died, and ultimately, again, the son of the shchimira is making the claim. I will say, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Rashi's kind of towards the top. It's about 10 lines in from where the lines get short to the top of Rashi. So we'll say, so one is talking about a situation where the shchimira himself is alive, right? And therefore, again, the shchimira says, yes, I wrote this document, and let's say the shchimira's name is Reuven, right? So Reuven says, yes, I wrote this document, give it to Shimon. Ha bebrei, Rashi says, shemes micholyo v'amr v'zeh b'no omer hachziro. So when the shchimira himself is saying, yes, Reuven, the shchimira, wrote this gift over to Shimon. So ultimately, again, then we return the document. But when the shchimira died, and now it's his son, and his son is saying, my father wrote this property over to Shimon, return the document over to Shimon, that's when we don't listen. Now what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, listen to this. Mas nisin de ka'amar tenu nosnin bididei. So therefore, both say the Mishnah, which says that when it comes to daitikos, if the shchimira himself says give it to the person named in the shtar. We listen. Why? So the Gemara says, Dibar mehadahu. Because at the end of the day, I will say the Shchiv Meir, while he's still alive, has the ability to gift or re-gift to as many people who he wants. So we'll say, I don't know if I made this point clearly yesterday. Right? Reuven's a Shchiv Meir. Right? So Reuven's on his deathbed. Reuven decides on his deathbed, remember I will say, there is a power that a Shchiv Meir has on his deathbed to convey property ownership in ways that you can't do in any other places in halacha. Right? There's a concept of divrei Shchiv Meir kiksuvin dechimsurin dami. The words of a Shchiv Meir are as if they are committed to writing and given over. In other words, normally in halacha, right? If I say I would like to convey this iPhone over to Reuven, so again I will say saying you want to convey it doesn't do anything. You need all types of mechanisms of kinyanim. Shchiv Meir is the exception to this rule. Whatever Shchiv Meir says is done. So now watch this. When Reuven, the Shchiv Meir says I want to give property over to Shimon. Again, Reuven has the ability to give it to Shimon. Now let's say that's on Tuesday. Let's say Wednesday, Reuven's like, you know what? Shimon didn't even come to visit me today. He didn't call once, not a text message. I'm giving it to Levi. Does Reuven have the ability to do that? Yes. In other words, as long as Reuven's not dead, he could change his mind as many times. So I will say it's a good mussar in life in general. As long as you're not dead, you can change your mind. Right? It's never too late to change as long as you are breathing. Once you're dead, that's it. Kind of no backsies. But at the end of the day, so therefore again, when Reuven is alive, even as a shchina, it's very important. Because remember, why is Reuven able to change his mind? Why is he able to change his mind? Because remember, the whole chap of a Shchiv Meir is when is this gift triggered? When is it triggered? Upon death. So therefore, he could change his mind about who the recipient is going to be as many times. Now, I will say, obviously, I want to be clear. If Reuven explicitly conveys ownership to Shimon, using a formal kinyan, and does this during his lifetime, then of course it belongs to Shimon. But we're talking about over here deathbed gifts. The way deathbed gifts work is they're triggered, or they actualize upon death. So therefore, Reuven can change his mind as many times as he wants. So the Gemara says, "Dabar mehaderhu ta'amiran inami yaval neshachina." Because what we say like this. So watch this. Reuven wrote a daitiki, right? So Reuven wrote in a document, "I am giving a deathbed gift to Shimon," which essentially means that upon my death, Shimon is going to acquire field A. So now what happens? I'm walking down the street. I'm walking down the street. I find this document, this deathbed document. I say, "Reuven, did you write this?" Reuven says, "Yes, I wrote it and give it to Shimon." The halacha is, we give it to Shimon. Why? Because there's no loss. There's no potential exploitation over here. Meaning what? What do I have to be concerned about? That maybe Reuven gave it to Shimon and then Reuven gave it to someone else, or Reuven gave it to someone else, then Reuven gave it to Shimon. Reuven can change his mind a million times, as many times as he wants. He goes on, he says, let's say Reuven went ahead and gifted it to someone else. Lesba psida dekama ubasra basra zachi dahadrbe mikama. So we'll say, because at the end of the day, let's say Reuven says, give it back to Shimon. Let's say it turns out that there's another guy, Levi, and Levi produces a document, a daitiki, a deathbed document, right, that is dated later than Shimon's. Who gets the field? Levi. Because so essentially whoever has the latest dated deathbed gift document is the one who's going to be the recipient. So essentially the Gemara says there's no harm, right? There's nothing bad that could come from us returning the document to the person named in the document, all assuming that what? All assuming that Reuven, the Shchiv Meir, the conveyor, agrees that he wrote this document and wants it returned. Beautiful. However, ki katani bebraisa, afa pisha shnei modim lo yachsher lo lezeh lo lezeh. But I will say in the Braisa where it says that if I'm walking down the street and I find a daitiki, I find a deathbed document, and it says that Reuven gave over a deathbed gift to Shimon, even if Reuven and Shimon agree. Now I will say, now watch this, fast forward a little bit. In this case over here, Reuven died. So I find this document, and who do I go over? I go over to Reuven's son. We'll just call him son, right? I go over to Reuven's because I already used Shimon, right? So I go over to Reuven's son, and I say, son, I found this document that Reuven, your father, went ahead and wrote. The son says, yes, that is correct. Yeah, I agree to it. And Shimon named in the document agrees to it. You can't give it back in that case to either party. Why? So the Gemara says, Babari Darminon, Doma Kasav Avola Hai Ve'imlach V'lo Yaven Ehile. Because what am I concerned about? What do I have to be concerned about in the case? I have to be concerned about the following scenario. Maybe Reuven wrote a daitiki to Shimon. And then what happened? He decided not to give it to Shimon. Right? V'lo Yaven Ehile. Ubasar Demei Savua. It was after Reuven died. The son ended up conveying property to another person. So let's say after Reuven the father died, so son decided to give the property to Levi, and he wrote a document to Levi saying this. And now afterwards, son has giver's remorse that he ever gave the property to Levi. So what is Savar Mehadr Lamatzina Hadrin? I will say second wide line, 19b. So now son understands I can't retract from Levi because it's already been given to him. But what will I do? So the Gemara says, Emar Luhu Da'aba Yavi Leilahai V'nasnu Leik Siva V'nezel V'nefak Minei. So we'll say, so what happens? So now son has remorse that he gave over the property or sold the property or gifted the property to Levi. So he says like this, you know what? I remember that my father wrote a document, a deathbed document, giving over property to Shimon. He never actually gave it to Shimon, but now let's go ahead. Now that someone found this document, so I'll get into cahoots with Shimon. Son and Shimon will get into cahoots. Let's extract the property from Levi, give it to Shimon, and now son says to Shimon, you and I will split it 50-50. Split it 50-50. Hilchach Amrina Lei. Therefore we say to the son, Anon hai ksava lo yahavina lahai. So therefore, again, I will say, when I find this document, we say to son, I'm sorry, we can't go ahead and give this over. We can't give this over ultimately again to. We can't give this over to Shimon. The Dilma michtav kasve avua meyav lo yavelei. Because I have to be concerned that maybe son, maybe your father Reuven wrote this document to Shimon, but never actually delivered it. So the Gemara says, Yavit atl inishachrina, and now we're concerned that son, you gave this property to someone else, i.e. to Levi, and you have giver's remorse. So, and therefore, again, that you're trying to maybe orchestrate some type of fictitious reality over here because you're in cahoots with Levi in order to extract it from Shimon. So you say to the son like this: if you're telling the truth, that your father actually went ahead and gave the property to Shimon, right? And you never engaged in any other transaction with this property. So very simple. Son, write a new document to Shimon right now. Write a new document to Shimon right now. Because this way, again, if the property really does belong to Shimon, right? So even if halacha l'maisa, again, you wrote it to someone else, ultimately, again, that person, Shimon, will have a pre-existing shtar that pre-exists your shtar that you gave to Levi. So in other words, we'll say, so it's actually so kind of, let me tell you, it's outside. So Gemara essentially says two different cases. Right? In both cases, you have Reuven and Shemira giving over property over to Levi, to Shimon, the recipient. So in case number one, which is the case of the Mishnah, so the Reuven is alive, I'm walking down the street, find the shtar. Both Reuven and Shimon agree that Lamaisa this transaction occurred, I give it back. Right? Why? Because we'll say there's no loss. Let's play this out. What do I have to potentially be concerned about? That maybe after Reuven gave this shtar to Shimon, right? Maybe Reuven changed his mind and decided, you know what? I'm not giving the property to Shimon, I'm giving it to Levi. Does Reuven have the ability to do that? Does he have the ability to change his mind? Absolutely. You always have the power to change your mind up until the day that you die. So therefore, again, so what's the worst case scenario? Someone else is going to come along with a document that's dated later on. Fine. So they'll have the stronger claim. But where both Reuven and Shimon are agreeing that this transaction occurred, no problem giving it back. Case number two of the Brisa, on the both sides. Case number two of the Brisa is where I'm walking down the street, I find this document that says Reuven gave a deathbed gift to Shimon, but Reuven's dead. Reuven's dead. Who is alive? Reuven's son. I go over to son, and again, in this case, son says, yes, my father did this, give the document back to Shimon. In this case, we have to be concerned for some level of collusion between son and Shimon. What we're concerned about in this case over here is that maybe Reuven wrote this document, never actually delivered it, so there was never a deathbed gift. Son, after the death of the father, son, the inheritor, gave property to Levi. Son regrets that he gave it to Levi, but can't extract it anymore. So now, when I find this document, this is a golden opportunity for son to extract the property from Levi, go ahead and go to Shimon, get into cahoots with Shimon, and split it 50-50 with Shimon. So that, because we have that concern, we can't give back the document to Shimon. So instead, what we tell son is, listen, if you're telling the truth, you just write a new document to Shimon, conveying ownership over to Shimon, and Shalom Yisrael. Nothing's going to happen. And assuming you're telling the truth, that you did not subsequently sell or give this property to anyone else, we shouldn't run into any issues over here. Now, I say, you think to yourself, this is it seems like such a far-fetched thing you're concerned about. That son gave it to Levi, and now he regrets giving it to Levi, and now he's trying to use this document that was never executed to extract it from Levi. You're right, it is a little far-fetched. But I will say, but remember, what's the problem over here? When you find the document lying in the street, the effectiveness, right, of this document has been compromised. So therefore, what we see in this case over here is you have to begin to be choshesh for scenarios that you would not normally need to be choshesh for. That's what's happening over here. So say that's the resolution, right? That's how we resolve the seemingly contradictory stances of the Mishnah and the Brisa, talking about two different cases. Beautiful. Tanrabanan, here we go. Matzah shover. Listen to this. Let's say you find the receipt. Now, what's the case of the receipt? So remember again, when the couple is married, the woman has a ksuva. Couple gets divorced. So husband is obligated to pay his wife the ksuva. After he pays, she gets a shover. Right? Ultimately, again, she gets a receipt. So now what happens, Bosai? You find out the husband normally she writes that receipt to the husband. So now in this case, interestingly enough, I'm walking down the street and I find the receipt. So Rabbi says, so now what do I do? So what's the halacha? So bisman she'isha moda yachsu labal. So if the woman, Rachel, we'll call her Rachel, Reuven's married to Rachel. So if Rachel admits that yes, this is my shover, this is my receipt, my husband paid me my ksuva, so ultimately give it back to the husband. Perfect. Eina isha moda. What happens if the woman does not admit? Let's say the woman said, you know what, my husband never paid me my ksuva, right? And therefore, again, I wrote this receipt in anticipation of being paid, but I was never actually paid, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, don't return it to my husband. So what's the halacha? Lo yaksir lo lazeh v'lo lazeh. So we'll say if she is not moda, then we don't return it to either party. Okay. So the Gemara says, bisman she'isha moda miyas yaksir lebal. So we'll say, so again, if the woman, let's go back to the first case, right? So I'm walking down the street, I find this receipt that says, I, Rachel, have received payment for my ksuva from my husband, Reuven. So now what's the halacha? If the woman is moda, that indeed she wrote this receipt and she received payment, we give it back to the husband. So the Gemara says, I v'lechosh dilma kasva litin benisan v'lo nasna at Tishrei. So this goes back, harkens back to yesterday's daf. So a shover, a receipt, like any document, is dated. So why aren't we concerned that maybe, the date on this document is Nisan, but maybe the woman pre-wrote this, in anticipation of payment of her ksuva. She pre-wrote this, dated it in Nisan, but it wasn't actually paid or wasn't actually delivered until Tishrei. And what do I have to be concerned about? Va'azal zambanta l'ksuva sabatova sanaminisa v'atishrei. Meanwhile, we'll say what happened? She sold her ksuva. So she wrote. Rachel wrote this. She wrote this receipt in Nisan, but she wasn't actually paid her ksuva until Tishrei. So meanwhile, between Nisan and Tishrei, she sold her ksuva. Right? Which, by the way, a woman has the ability. Remember again, a woman can sell her ksuva. What do we call that? What is she selling? She's selling a future. Right? She's selling a future option. Now, we'll say, obviously, if you're buying a ksuva, you're buying it at a deep discount, right? Because remember, again, you're only getting paid out in the event that what? Either, again, husband dies or they get divorced. So I would imagine, unless you know that, right? Now, if you know a couple with terrible shalom bias, you might say that's a pretty solid investment, right? But otherwise, like Lamanisa, you're buying it at a deep discount. So what happens? Well, in this case, So she wrote the shover in Nisan. But it wasn't actually, ksuva wasn't paid until Tishrei. So between Nisan and Tishrei, what did she do? She sold her ksuva. So now what's going to happen? Right, Nisan and Tishrei. So now fast forward a little bit. So now she sold her ksuva, let's call it in Sivan. Right? It was dated in Nisan. She said, now, meanwhile, the ksuva itself wasn't paid until Tishrei. So now Tishrei comes, she gets payment for her ksuva, husband gets the receipt. The receipt says that the ksuva was paid as of when? As of Nisan. She sold her ksuva in Sivan. So now what could he do? He could exploit this situation, go back and extract anything that was sold, because he could say, look, my wife sold her ksuva, but she didn't really have the right to do that because the ksuva was already paid back in Nisan. V'haraya, I have a document that says, I have a receipt that says the ksuva was paid already back in Nisan. So the Gemara says, and the husband could extract sold properties inappropriately. Rava says, we'll say top of chaf, shmamina isa l'dishmuel. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here, interestingly enough, that we hold off the position of Shmuel. So we'll say, this is actually, we've had this before, and it's actually quite riveting. The Amr Shmuel, hamochesh tarchov lechavero. We'll say, listen to this. If you sell a loan document or a note of indebtedness to someone else, the chazar umachlo, and I both say the creditor subsequently forgives the debt after the debt has been sold. What's the halacha? Machol. Ultimately, again, the debt is forgiven. Va'afilu yoresh machol, and even an inheritor has the ability to forgive a debt once it's been sold. So we'll say we've seen this concept of Shmuel a number of times before, and it's really quite fascinating. Essentially, what Shmuel says is like this: a creditor always retains the ability to forgive a debt, even if the debt has been sold. That power of forgiveness is always his. Even an inheritor, right? So in other words, Reuven lent money to Shimon, then subsequently sold the debt, right? Let's say Reuven sold the note. He sold the loan to Levi. Reuven always retains the ability to go ahead and forgive the debt even after it's resolved. Not only that, when Reuven dies, and now Reuven's son inherits the debt, halacha l'maisa, inheritor retains the ability to forgive the debt. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, right, if a person sells a loan to his friend, the chazar hamocher hazeh umachlo, and now the seller, who's also the original creditor, forgives the debt. Machol hu etza halova. Hilchach im machra zuk suvasa be'iyar tahainu shtarchov v'chazru machalasa lebal b'tishrei machol v'shaper taraf bal. So we'll say the reason why this is appropriate over here is because halacha l'maisa, the woman is the creditor. So therefore, if halacha l'maisa, she sells her ksuv, right? So now she wrote the shover. She wrote the receipt back in Nisan. Right? It was dated in Nisan. Wasn't delivered until Tishrei. Let's say she goes in and she sells off ksuva property in Iyar. And now ultimately again, ksuva is paid back or later on in Tishrei. She has the ability to forgive that ksuva debt to her husband. And in essence, the husband has the ability to collect back from property that she sold in Iyar. Based on the dynamic of Shmuel, who holds that a creditor always has the ability to forgive the debt even after the debt has been sold. Pretty incredible. Abai says, the truth is, even if you don't hold of Shmuel, this case still works. How so? I'm asking, what's the case over here? We're talking about a case ultimately again over here where she has a actual ksuva. Rashi says over here, so we're talking about a case where she has the actual physical ksuva. If she had sold the ksuva, then what? We'll say apparently, when a woman sells her ksuva, what does the buyer get? The actual ksuva itself. Therefore, we're talking about a case where she has the actual ksuva document. If she has the actual ksuva document, that shows that halacha l'maisa, she never sold the ksuva. Incredible. For Rava says, imi shum shtar ksuva, if that's the best that she got, that she has the document itself, and therefore we're not concerned that she sold it, chashinu l'shtei ksuvos. What about the fact that maybe there are two ksuvos? Abaye says, Chada l'shtei ksuvos lo chashinu. Abaye says, number one, a man doesn't write two ksuvos. That's number one. Va'od shover bizmano tarif. And furthermore, again, a shover has the ability to collect based on the date inside of it. So the Gemara says, Abaye l'tamei da'amra edav bechasumin is bechasumav zachenlo. Abaye goes according to his reasoning, because Abaye says essentially a shover is effective as of the date that it is written, because once witnesses sign on it, they have the ability to acquire that ksuva for the woman as of that date. Reminiscent of what? Of the shtar shikhr that we saw in yesterday's daf. Okay, incredible. Sefer will say, bottom line, halacha l'maisa in this case is that if I am walking down the street and I find a shover, I find the receipt that says Reuven paid Rachel her ksuva. So again, if the woman doesn't admit, like if the woman says, no, I'm sorry, I never got paid for my ksuva, then we don't return that receipt to either party. But if the woman admits, right, Rachel admits, yes, I got paid my ksuva, then halacha l'maisa, we return the receipt to the husband. We have to be concerned for all different types of things. So the Gemara works that through. There's nothing to be concerned about. There's no real way to exploit this situation. And therefore, as long as Rachel is admitting that the ksuva was paid, we return the receipt back to Reuven, the husband. Beautiful. All right, we'll say weiter. Mishnah. Here we go. Matzah igros shum. Veigros mazan. So we'll say, now watch this. Take a look at Rashi. A lot of interesting keys here. And I will say, now these are all documents. These are all documents that would normally be executed by a Beis Din. So I will say, so we find igros shum. Look at Rashi. Igros shum. Shamu Beis Din nichse lova lemalva bezocho. So we'll say, an igros shum, a document of valuation, is a document, right? Reuven lent money to Shimon. So Shimon owes money to Reuven. So both say, so sometimes what Beis Din would do is, especially if Shimon doesn't have any liquid assets, so Beis Din would valuate Shimon's property for Reuven, so that Reuven knows what he has the ability to collect. That's a shum. Shum is a valuation. So Matzah igros shum, I find the document of valuation. The igros mazon. We'll say igros mazon is a document in which a man agrees, right? Reuven's married to Rachel. Rachel has daughters, let's say, from a different marriage. Reuven agrees to go ahead and support the daughters of Shimon. Oh, sorry. Wrong union. Right? So again, Reuven, right? Reuven agrees to support the daughters of Rachel. That's called igros mazon. Shtari chalitza. Pretty self-explanatory. It's chalitza document. So we'll say, interestingly enough, chalitza, like a get, would often be recorded in a document. Shari chalitza, miyun, miyun, again, what's miyun? Miyun is, remember again, of a mother or a brother, older brother, marry off a girl. There's the ability to do that. That creates a rabbinic marriage, because it's only rabbinic where the girl's a ketana. Right? Rabbinic marriage, she has the ability to refuse the marriage. Once she refuses it, the marriage is dissolved. That's called miyun. We would record miyun in a document. Ushtari bererin, we'll discuss what shtar bererin is. So these are all documents that were executed by a Beis Din. In other words, private people don't write these documents. Only a Beis Din writes these documents. So I'm walking down the street. I find this document. Harezi yachzir. I return it. Rashi says over here, both say first of the Y lines in Rashi, Harezi yachzir. Delekala mechash l'shema nimlach. Beis Din lo kasvum ella bidavar makuyam ulepiron amilekala mechash. So both listen to this. What would I be concerned about in this case? That maybe Beis Din wrote these documents, but they were never executed. So both say, apparently when it comes to Beis Din, that doesn't happen. Beis Din only writes a document if the document is going to be executed. So therefore, again, if you found this, then Lamaisa, again, that means that this is a bona fide document. Beis Din doesn't write it unless it's going to get done. And therefore, Aloha Lamaisa, you could return it. Matzah bechafisa b'deluskama. So we'll say, watch this. Let's say I'm walking down the street and I find a document and it's in a container. Chafisa deluskama are different types of containers. Some of this in the Gemara. Right? So I find a document, right? The message in a bottle, right? I find a document in a container. So what's the halacha? Or the Gemara says, tachrish shel shtaros, or aguda shel shtaros. Or I will say, I find a tachrich or an aguda. Again, we'll discuss what those means as well. But let's say, again, I find essentially like a roll of documents or a pile of documents. What's the halacha? Harezi yachzir. Ultimately, again, these should be returned. Now, what's the logic over here? Rashi says, Harezi yachzir. The davar sheish bo simen hu kid mefarish b'gemara shakli simen shkishiyomru abaylim bekli kach v'kach matzah osam. So we'll say these look like documents that were specifically placed in an order. In other words, so when you find documents in a kli, or you find documents rolled up together, so this is not random. So because it's not random, again, this is a siman. In other words, so someone could identify these documents, and therefore, again, they're returned, provided that someone gives the siman. Okay, we'll discuss greater depth. V'kama aguda shel shtaros. By the way, what is considered to be a bundle of shtaros? Shlosha kshurin zeh bazeh. 3 shtaros tied to each other. Right, so if you find 3 documents tied to each other, this obviously, this is not a random placement. Because it's not a random placement, if someone is able to give the siman, someone is able to give the identifying mark, then einachinami, you would return the documents. Listen to this, very interesting case. Echad halova mishlosha yachzir lelova. Shabbos say, now watch this. If you find, let's say, 3 documents, right? 3 documents bundled together, right? And a document 1 says, Reuven borrowed money from Shimon. Document 2 says, Reuven borrowed money from Levi, and document 3 says Reuven borrowed money from Yehuda. Right? So 3 loan documents with the same borrower named. What's the halacha? Yachzir lelova. We give those back to Reuven. Right? Because I both say it would be too haphazard to think. So you both say, because there are 2 scenarios now when you find this. What are the 2 scenarios? Scenario number 1 is that Shimon lost his document, Levi lost his document, and Yehuda lost his document. Right? Or possibility 2 is that what? Reuven lost 3 documents. So I will say, because you have all 3 of them bundled together, the statistical probability is that what? Is that it's Reuven, the borrower, who had all of his loan documents bundled together and lost them, rather than saying that the creditors each lost their independent document. Therefore, we give this back to Reuven. Interesting. We give it back to Reuven. Shlosha lovim min ha'echad yachzir l'malva. So we'll say, what happens if the reverse case, right? I have one document that says Reuven lent money to Shimon, another document that says Reuven lent money to Levi, and a third document that says Reuven lent money to Yehuda. So we'll say, so once again, it could be that Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda each lost their respective loan documents, or the other possibility is that what? Is that Reuven, the lender, had all of his loan documents bundled together. So we'll say, so therefore, the greater statistical probability is that Reuven, the lender, had all of his documents together. Therefore, we give the documents back to Reuven, the lender. Incredible. Masa shtar ben shtarosav ve'ini yodea mativo. So Rabbi said, this is an interesting case. Right? You know that day comes along where you finally go through the papers on your desk. Right? That much long-awaited, much anticipated day. You go through that, you go through the papers, and you find a document on the desk, and you don't know what it is. What does that mean? I don't know what it is. So I will say, so now watch this. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, V'inio de mativo, etzlo imalove efkido etzlo, ohamalve oshem. I will say, watch this. This is fascinating. I'm going through my papers, and I find on my desk a loan document that says, Reuven lent money to Shimon. I will say, so now what's my problem? I don't remember, did Reuven, the lender, give me this just to hold on to, so that when Reuven's ready to collect the money from Shimon, he has the ability to do so? Or did Shimon pay off the debt and ask me to hold on to this as a receipt? And I have no recollection. I know Reuven, I know Shimon, I just have no recollection as to why this document is on my desk. So, what do I do with it? Rabbi say, Yehemunach ad sheyavo elio. So Rabbi say, by the way, this is a mefurish raya that sometimes you don't have to clean things up, right? Sometimes you are allowed to leave things on your desk, right? This is great. So the next time your wife asks you to please clean up your desk, I say, listen, it's a Mishnah. Some things you have to leave ad sheyavo elio, right? Sometimes the garage has to look this way ad sheyavo elio, right? It's not me. It's the Mishnah, right? So I'll say, so incredible. So again, I can't do anything with this document because Lamaisa, I don't know who to give it back to. I just don't know who to give it back to. Incredible. Symphonos. So we'll say, if I have in my possession symphonos. Now, what are symphonos? Rashi says, Mish iman symphonos, mili katane emotzi mishtaros of shover shenichtel echem mishtaros. I will say a symphon we're going to see is a receipt. Is a receipt. If I find receipts And I will say again, sometimes you have a receipt and it's not clear again, is this a receipt because actually the debt was paid? Was it just proactively written but never executed? If you find the receipt, we assume that if a receipt was written, that is an accurate portrayal of what occurred, and therefore, again, we act based on what is written inside of the receipt. Rashi says, so the document is assumed to be repaid. So we'll say, watch this. And then we'll say, this is a different case. So normally we would say a receipt. We'll say, who should be in possession of a receipt? Who should be in possession of a receipt? Who should be in possession of a receipt? The borrower. The borrower, right? Because again, that receipt ensures that the lender can't. So I'll say, even though normally a receipt should be in the possession of the borrower, if we find what looks like a properly executed receipt, we assume that is valid. It's kasher and yashar, and that's ultimately, again, we go based on that. But the borrower should have had it. It's true, but maybe the borrower entrusted me. So essentially what the Mishnah is saying is whenever you see what looks like a properly executed receipt, we assume that is authoritative. All right, Rabbi say, a lot to unpack over here. Here we go. Gemara, my shtari beirurin. Rabbi say, what is a shtar beirurin? What is that? So acher targimu shtari ta'anasa. So Rabbi say here, in Bava, they said, shtar beirurin, Rabbi say, is a document which records the arguments of the respective parties. Okay. Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer Zeb Borer Lo Echa v'Zeb Borer Lo Echa. Rabbi Yirmiyah says no. We'll say Shtar Berin is a document which outlines. We'll say when you go to Beis Din, technically speaking, each side has a right to choose a dayan, right? And then often those two dayanim choose a third. So that document where they would record judicial selection, that was called the Shtar Berin. Okay. Fine. In general, whatever document you find executed by Beis Din, you go ahead and you return. So the Gemara says, Hahu Gita, listen to this. Hahu Gita, Dishtachach Beidina de Rav Huna. Taviksiv be b'shviri masa the arachis nara. So I'll say, so what happened? One time, there was a guy bringing a get, a shaliach, and he lost it. And they found a get inside of the Beis Din of Rav Huna, and the get was written that, like the location, B'shvirei Masa Da'arachis Nara, in the city of Shviri, that sits on the river Rachis, right? The Rachis River. We saw this back in our Gittin days, that this is how you have to write a get, right? We write the location upon which the get was executed. Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna says, Amar Beis Rabosai, Chayshinu l'shnei Shviri. We have to be concerned that maybe there are two places named Shviri. Otherwise, Shabbos say, so in this case over here, so look at Rashi. Chashin l'shnei shviri. Afapi shviri hayadua lanu. Ein b'shnei Yosef ben Shimon shemiyesh shviri acher. So Shabbos say, so now watch this. So now Shabbos say, so let's say again, it says, right, in this document that we find, it says that this get was executed in Shviri that is situated on the banks of the river Rachis. And it says that Yosef ben Shimon is going ahead and divorcing his wife. So Rav Huna says, we have to be concerned that maybe there are two places named Shviri. And even though in this particular town of Shiri, there's not two guys named Yosef and Shimon, but maybe there are two towns named Shviri. And therefore, again, you can't return this get because maybe you're returning it to the wrong person. So this was the position of Rav Huna. Right? Rav Huna says that in general, we'll say, this goes back to the motif that we saw in yesterday's daf from the day before as well. That when a document is lost, and you find the lost document, so we'll say, so in general, what's happened? The authenticity or effectiveness or kashrus of that document has been compromised. And so suddenly, we have to be concerned for things that normally we would not be concerned for. So therefore, Rav Huna says, we found this get in the Beis Medrash. Ultimately, again, Rav Huna says, we found this get in the Beis Medrash of Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, I'm sorry, you can't return it. You can't return it. Why? Because maybe there's another city called Rachish, that is called Shviri, that is situated on another river called Rachis, and maybe in that place there's another guy named Yosef ben Shimon. So we'll say, so therefore, halacha l'maisa, we have to be concerned for this. So Rav Chisda said to Rabba, Puk ayin de la'arta bay le Rav Huna minach. So we'll say, watch this. So Rav Chisda said to Rabba, listen, Rabba, go out and research this, right? Go out and research this because tonight Rav Huna is going to ask you about this ruling. Nafak dak va'ashkach. So we'll say what happened. So Rabbi did his homework, and Rabbi found the Mishnah. Which Mishnah? We'll say our Mishnah. Kol ma'aseh beis harei yachzir. So we'll say, what does our Mishnah say? Any document executed by a beis din, ultimately again should be returned. Now we'll say a get is a document executed by a beis din. Right? So therefore, again, based on this, if you find the get, you should be able to return it to its proper owner. You don't have to be choshesh, right, for two Yosef ben Shimons, unless you know that there are two guys named Yosef ben Shimon. You don't have to go ahead and be concerned that there are potentially two cities named Shiviri. Amrali Rav Amram l'Rabba. So Rav Amram said to Rabba, Hechi pashet mar isura me mamona. I don't understand. A case of get is a case of iser, prohibition. The Mishnah by Pashtus is talking about a case of mammon, monetary matters. So how can you extrapolate? How can you learn out Isser cases from monetary cases? Amarle Tarda. Alright, so it says, here's where it gets a little intense. Right, so Rabba said back to Rav Amram, Tarda means you're a nut job, right? Mushumam, right? You're crazy. You're crazy. Right? Eitan, don't try this. When you disagree with people, right? Always disagree nicely, right? Never calmly. I know you're a good boy. You wouldn't do this, right? So the nice again will say this is where it gets intense, right? So Meshumam, you're not. Shtari chalitza mi'unintanan. The Mishnah speaks about again shtar chalitza and a shtar miun. Now both say those are not monetary documents; those are Isra documents. So we'll say, so now what happens? So Rabba and Rav Amram get into it, right? Obviously, we'll say now, we're holding by name calling over here, right? We're holding by name calling. So what's going on? We'll say it's incredible. Paka arza de Rav. So we'll say, so listen to this. A beam in the base medrash cracked. We'll say, get ready for this Gemara. A beam in the base medrash cracked. So Rabba and Rav Amram are now getting into it. Beam in the base medrash cracked. Mar Amar mishum lasai di paka. Umar Amar mishum lasai di paka. So both say, so now let's translate the words, and let's see what's going on over here. So one of the people, in other words, says, Machlokes Rabba and Rav Amram. So one said, the beam cracked, because ultimately, again, Rabba insulted me. Rav Amram said, the beam cracked because Rabba insulted me. Right? That's Rav Amram. Rabba said, the beam cracked, why? Because the Lamaisa Rav Amram contradicted my ruling. So we'll say this is Rashi's interpretation. Look at Rashi. Mar Amram mishum lasai di dipaka b'shil mazali shekina al shegidafti umar Amram mishum lasai di dipaka sheishbata al divar levayshin leismajish. So we'll say Rashi's understanding of the Gemara is that both Rabba and Rav Amram are claiming that the beam cracked as a sign that they were dishonored. Like the beam cracked to defend my honor. The beam cracked to defend my honor, right? So Rabba's saying the beam cracked ultimately again because Rav Amram contradicted my ruling and they shouldn't have done so. And Rav Amram is saying, no, the beam cracked because Rabba embarrassed me. So both say, so the Maharsha in this Gemara, the Maharsha says a little bit different. The Maharsha says that's a very strange interpretation because then essentially what kind of each one is saying that it's my compromised dignity that caused the beam to crack. So the Maharsha comments on this, and the Maharsha says, "The hacha ikale perusha delo hayakol echa mishabech mishum zechuso v'chashivuso nasekach barza eli mishum l'say dahainu mazali tenu godel yoser mazalo." So the Maharsha says that no, really what they're saying is it's not that it's my kavod, but rather it's my mazel that caused the beam to crack. Okay, it's still an interesting interpretation. So I saw Bosai that the Ben Yehoyada has a totally different interpretation of this. The Ben Yehoyada says, listen to this. Nira kol echad ve'echad tala hadavar biatzmo k'dei she'yisvada al asher haya sibalazo. So Bosai, let's take a step back for just a second. The fact that the beam cracked in the base of Medrash, Bosai, that indicated that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was profoundly displeased with what was happening in the base Medrash. That's what this is. The Rebbe Shalom was saying is, this is not how Yidden behave. We don't call each other names. We don't attack each other. This is not what Jews do. Could Jews disagree? We've mastered the art of disagreement. But we have to learn to disagree agreeably. That's how Jews have machlokes. Machlokes and argument and differences of opinions. This is one of the most beautiful parts of the fabric of our national identity. Like we talk about over so many times. Torah tells us, Rashi HaKadosh says, when we stood at Har Sinai, we were an ish echad b'lev echad, one people with one heart. It doesn't say ish echad b'dea achas. It doesn't say one people with one opinion. Right? Why? Because one people with one opinion never happened. Never happened and never will. But the beautiful part is you could be one people with one heart, even with multiple different opinions. As long as you learn the art of respect, as long as you learn the ability to listen to the other, as long as you learn how to disagree agreeably. This is the power of Klal Yisrael. When Rav Amram and Rabbah go at it, and there's name calling, and there's too vicious debate, too vicious. Shabbos said, then the beam of the base medrash. Remember again, Shabbos said, that beam was a pillar. When that beam cracks, that shows that the foundation, the pillar of the base medrash is cracking apart. Because when Jews can't get along, the very fabric of the base medrash begins to come undone. So the Ben Yoyoda says something amazing. The Ben Yoyoda says that what's happening at the end of the story is Mar Amar Mishum. So Rashi's interpretation is both are claiming that the beam broke because I was hurt. Right? Rabbah says, I was contradicted in a vicious way, and that's why the Beis Medrash is kind of like advocating for my bruised ego. And Rav Amram was saying Rabbah called me a name, and the Beis Medrash is breaking because of my bruised ego. The Ben Yoda says, no, it's just the opposite. They're both taking responsibility. The Ben Yoda says, Kol echad ve'echad tala hadavar bi'atzmo, kedei sheyesvada al asher hayohu siba lezos, velasos tshuva, Vatikun lakach. They will say, in fact, what's happening over here, says the Ben Yoda, is Rabbi and Rav Amram are not claiming, look, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is standing up for my honor. No, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is standing up for my honor. No, just the opposite. Rabbi is saying, I should have never called another Jew a name. And Rav Amram is saying, you know what? I should have been a little softer when I refuted the position of Rabbi. Rabbi will say, each one is taking responsibility for their negative interpersonal behavior. And each one is doing tshuva for how they treated the other. And I will say, is this not absolutely overwhelming? Reb Mar tells us to the beam of the base kibbutz. Can you imagine being in the base medrash? Can you imagine there's this vicious debate? There's name calling. There's, what are you talking about? You're crazy. You're enough. You're meshumam. You're crazy. How can you bring this up? Come on, pay attention to the base medrash. And they're sitting there going at it, personal attacks. And the beam of the base medrash breaks. And they hear that break. And in that moment says to Ben Yoda, Rabbi says, Rav Amram, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Rav Amram says to Rabbi, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let's say the only thing we have in this world is each other. The only thing we have in this world is each other. Right? Each other, and of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Klal Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're one thing. We're one thing. And I would say we can't be at each other's throats. And we can't act negatively towards each other. And we can't hurt one another. And when we do, because that happens, right, even in the closest of families, ultimately you end up hurting someone who you love. We'll say, this is incredibly important. What do you do the moment you hurt someone? What do you do? So I'll say, this is what we normally do, which is often we defend it, we double down, we explain it away. They will say, what you do when you hurt someone who you care about is, you apologize. And you apologize right then and there. You own it, you take responsibility for it, you do tshuva when you break the beam of your relationships. Whether it's with your marriage, whether it's with your children, whether it's with your friends, whether it's with a fellow Jew, when you break the beam of relationship, own it, acknowledge it, and fix it right then and there. That, says the Ben Yehoyada, is happening. The moment that machlokes becomes too intense, the moment that machlokes becomes too personal, that's the moment that Rav Amram and Rabbah take a step back, say, I love you, I'm sorry, let's start this again. Incredible. So let's go weiter. So ultimately, again, if you found shtaros in a container, so the Gemara says, "My chafisa." What's a chafisa? Amara barachana chamas kitano, a small utensil. And what's the truth? This chamas kitano really means a small wine skin. So let's see. My deluskama, what's a deluskama? Amra bar Shmuel Telika desabi, the box that old people carry around. I guess old people, they want to keep their stuff right there, the stuff that they need more readily available. I don't know, like what do you, whatever, old person box, right? So lemaisa, there's got to be a better term for it, right? But lemaisa, whatever, like a little zach, just to keep all of your stuff right there. Okay, so the idea is, if you find a document in a utensil, then halacha lemaisa, that's a siman. Okay, I will say actually very apropos because lemaisa simanim, right? Lost objects and simanim is going to be the topic of our next parak, which is very exciting. All right, let's go back there. So the Gemara says tachrich shel shtaros aguda shel shtaros. So remember again, if you find a bundle of shtaros, so what's the halacha in that case? So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says Tarabanan kamahu tachrich shel shtaros. We'll say when we speak about a bundle or a pile of shtaros, what's a bundle or a pile? So the Gemara says, shlosha kruchin zebazeh. It's three shtaros that are rolled, kruchin karuch, right? That are rolled one into the other. The kamihi aguda, what's a pile? Kamihi aguda shel shtaros. Shlosha kshurin zebazeh. So we'll say, so again, just to be clear, so we'll say tachrich are shtaros that are kind of rolled together. Aguda is a shtaros that are piled together but tied to one another. Three shtaros that are tied to one another. So we'll say, so again, the fact that you have such orderly placement of shtaros rolled together or piled together indicates intentionality. When there's intentionality, then that by definition becomes a siman. Shamas Milo, what do you see from here? Kesher siminhu. Ultimately, again, that the way something is tied could be an identifying mark. Incredible. Tani Rabbi Chia, Shlosha Kruchin Zebazeh. If you have three shtaros that are rolled together, Ihaki Hainu Tachrich. That's the same thing as Tachrich. Tachrich Kol Chad V'Chad Berosha Dechavre. Aguda Derami Ada Di Krucho. So we'll say, so apparently even both of them can be cases of rolled shtaros. There are two different ways you can roll a shtar, right? Two different, sounds interesting, right? Two different ways you can roll a shtar. So I'll say one way to roll a shtar is what we call aguda. Aguda means you put all the pieces of paper on top of each other and then roll them together. All right. Apparently, kruchin means you roll shtar one, then you roll shtar two around shtar one, then you roll shtar three around shtar two, and kind of you roll them like that. All right, two different ways to roll them. So my machris. So I'll say, by the way, if you find a pile of shtaros like this, what is it that you announce? If you find it, like, what do you announce? So the Gemara says, minyan. You go ahead and you announce the number, right? I found three shtaros, and then someone comes along and would say, oh, I lost three shtaros, and they were piled one on top of the other, and tied together, or they were rolled together. So my area tlasa. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, why? So therefore, why do we have to make it a case of three shtaros? If we're talking about number, afilu train nami, even two should be a siman. So elokidam ravina tiva machriz hachanam sharachas. You're right. The truth is, Rabbi, in this case over here, what we just announced is, if you find this, which you would announce is, I found shtaros, plural. Then, of course, it will be up to the person to identify two things. Number one, the number of shtaros that he lost. And number two, how those shtaros were arranged, right? Were they piled and tied together? Were they rolled together? Fine. So Meir goes like, halova mishlosha yachzir lalova. So we'll say, now watch this. So remember again, this is the other case that we spoke about before, which as we know, we'll say, we'll stop over for today. Wow, tremendous Gemara. We'll say tomorrow, very exciting Gemara. We begin Elam Metziah. Right, new parak tomorrow, very exciting. We have plenty of time. It's a shorter, it's a longer daf, but it's easier tomorrow. So we'll make up plenty of time. Have a great day.